In order to get a victory over the 24th ranked NC State Wolfpack on Saturday afternoon, the Louisville Cardinals will need to. We're going to talk about the keys to the game for Scott Satterfield's team on today's episode of the Locked On Louisville podcast.
You are Locked On Louisville, your daily podcast on the Louisville Cardinals. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, what's going on, everyone? Happy Friday. Welcome into another episode of the Locked On Louisville podcast. I'm your host, Dalton Pence. Today's episode is brought to you by Underdog. Sign up on UnderdogFantasy.com with the promo code Locked On and get your first deposit doubled up to $100. I want to take this time to say thank you all for making us your first listen of the day. Just a reminder, the Locked On Louisville podcast is free on all streaming services, 5 days a week, your team, every day. On today's episode of the show, we're talking about the keys to victory for the Louisville Cardinals. 3 of them in particular, in my opinion, they are getting the offense going early, the offensive line setting the tone at the line of scrimmage, and then finally doing what has been done over the past couple weeks, and that is the defense really getting into the opposing backfield. So we're starting out offensively. I think that the most growth that needs to be had over the next 2 weeks will be needed from the team's offense. We talked earlier this week about how Louisville's potential offensively has been kind of prevented in ways from the lack of overall consistency. One aspect of that lack of consistency is the way that this Louisville offense starts out games. We've seen it time and time again that when the team struggles to gain some momentum early on in games, it makes it tough offensively through the duration of the contest. Now, granted, that would be obvious. If you struggle to begin the game, it's going to be hard to gain that momentum. But we saw that particularly in last week's matchup against the Clemson Tigers. You can talk about the officiating all you want, and we talked about how bad that was. Offensively, Louisville really wasn't able to get much going at all. Granted, you're on the road against a top 10 team. Clemson's defense, despite missing some key players, still a very, very talented group and very well coached. So when you look at offensive momentum in that game, it was sort of non-existent. You started out the contest with multiple 3-and-outs. Even on the drive in which Louisville ended up scoring the first points on Tyon Evans' 16-yard touchdown run, if you go back to the first series of downs or first set of downs on that possession, they had a 3rd and long. Now, granted, they did what was improbable and ran the ball on 3rd and 15 or 3rd and 17, whatever the yardage count was, and they picked up the 3rd down thanks to a big run from Jawar Jordan. But we could very well have been talking about this game in a whole different manner had that drive gone differently, and really had that play gone differently, because if the Cardinals don't convert, which they probably shouldn't have, they punt the ball away, and they weren't able to get much going offensively outside of that. Even in the second half, they started the second half not really able to do much. Had multiple drives on the other side of the field in Clemson territory, wasn't able to convert at all. So, or very, very little, I should say. They did score a touchdown on the very final play from scrimmage. But overall, the Clemson game starting out rough offensively. You look at the other games in which Louisville's offense hasn't necessarily been great. The season opener against Syracuse, tough start, not really able to get things going. The same can be said against Central Florida, in which the defense absolutely balled out in that Cardinal victory. You have the Pittsburgh game, another aspect of Louisville's defense rising to the occasion, bending but not breaking, but Louisville's offense not able to do much in that one. And then you flip the script and you talk about games in which Louisville did put up a solid offensive performance, and in most of those cases, it started from the very beginning. Florida State, scored a lot in the first half. South Florida, big first half. Even though James Madison, that contest wasn't a great offensive contest, you still were able to get the offense going to the point in which it was able to put up points. But Virginia, that's another instance to where in the second quarter, you were able to start putting some points together on Brock Doman's touchdown run. But needless to say, I think that there is enough differentiation between, starting good offensively and ending good offensively. I mean, obviously it has to be a consistency factor. You have to take advantage of, the field position and things of that nature. And just because you start good offensively doesn't mean you're going to automatically by default stay good offensively throughout the context of the game. And then on the other side, just because you don't start out good offensively doesn't mean that you're not going to, pick it up. So I get it. But this NC State defense is a defense that has been pretty solid almost all year long. They're averaging or they're giving up just under or just over 18 points per game to their opponents. When you compare that to what Louisville is doing, they're giving up 20.6 yards allowed, 321 per game for NC State, 353-ish for the Louisville Cardinals. A very, very good rushing defense for NC State. We'll talk about that here in just a second. But regardless, I think that when it comes to seeing that improvement from this Louisville offense, one way in which we could definitely have a solid performance from rushing and passing, the whole 9 yards offensively, is by watching this unit set the tone early on. And in the second segment, we're going to talk about the offensive line specifically, but it also pertains to whoever starts at quarterback. I think that, you have Brock Doman. If it's Brock Doman, when he's played, you look at that game against Boston College, didn't necessarily have that great of a game. You look at, the game against NC State. Well, yeah, you look at the game against NC State. No, if you look at the game against Virginia, didn't start out all that great. Had an interception and multiple incompletions to start the game before he was able to get going. The matchup against Clemson, not really able to get going early on. So for Brock Doman, if he does get the start, because it's questionable, most people think that he will probably be the quarterback this week for the Cardinals with Malik Cunningham battling injury. I think Doman will have to start out well. I think he's going to have to throw the football well from the beginning, make good reads from the beginning. Same with the rushing attack. I think Louisville can't afford to keep opening up games, and on their opening scripts of plays, it's a 3 and out, or it's, 2 sets of downs and then punting the ball away, to where you rush the ball once, you get a yard, then you're in 2nd and long, and then maybe, we've seen the past couple of weeks where Louisville has ran the ball twice in a sequence, and they're faced with a 3rd and long. And with a hurt Malik Cunningham, with Brock Doman, who still is inexperienced, that's not necessarily a solid recipe for success. So a lot of this is on play calling as well. I want to see the opening script put a little bit of deception into the mix. We talk about Bobby Petrino, and as much as, he had flaws and his coaching wasn't necessarily the greatest offensively, that's something you didn't have to worry about with a Bobby Petrino coach team, is that very early on, they were going to throw some deception into the mix. Get the ball into the hands of your playmakers. Get Amari Huggins-Bruce the ball out in space. Get Marshawn Legg going on an out route, on a slant over the middle, or even, something toward the sideline. Get the ball out quickly. Let your playmakers make a play. As much as this is on the personnel on the field to execute, whoever is starting at quarterback, whether it's Malik or Brock, to make the right reads. If Malik is playing, he's obviously going to be playing through injury, so he has to make the best decisions. And just essentially build some momentum from the beginning, to where you're not getting into a defensive slugfest with NC State, because it could definitely be that way. I don't necessarily think there's going to be a ton of points scored in this game. I could be wrong. But at the end of the day, if Louisville's offense can start out quickly, if they can set the tone early and gain some momentum, to where you're forcing NC State to try to come from behind with an inexperienced quarterback, hey, that is the first key to victory for the Louisville Cardinals, in my opinion. Offensively as well, the offensive line needs to set the tone for a handful of reasons. We're going to talk about those here in just a second, after we talk about our friends and the title sponsor of the show, Underdog Fantasy. This episode brought to you by Underdog Fantasy, the easiest place to spice up the college football season. Essentially, you pick 2 to 5 players across any team, not just the Cardinals, and decide if they will finish higher or lower than their projections. That's one of the easiest fantasy to play games out there, and you can win cold hard cash in a single game. Sign up with the promo code Locked On. It's all one word, and Underdog will double your first deposit up to $100. So deposit $100, get $100 for free. Go to UnderdogFantasy.com or use the Underdog Fantasy app in the App Store or Google Play. That's Underdog Fantasy with the promo code Locked On, all one word. So with that being said, get in on the college football pick'em action today. As always, I want to say thank you all for making Locked On Louisville your first listen. For your second listen, check out Locked On Sports Today. From the games that matter the most to the biggest stories in sports, go beyond the scoreboard and behind the scenes with local experts, insights only Locked On can provide. Locked On Sports Today, available on this app, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. So we're continuing talking about the offense. For the second key to the game, that is setting the tone in the trenches for the offensive line. Look, it's a solid offensive line in terms of personnel. There are a lot of snaps that have been played collectively from this group. There's a handful of veterans, Caleb Chandler, Brian Hudson, Trevor Reed, Adonis Boone, Renato Brown, so on and so forth. You have actually, is Renato Brown, who's injured? I think someone is injured. Is that correct on the offensive line? Is there somebody injured on the offensive line? I apologize if I'm wrong. I thought somebody was hurt. I could be completely wrong. I just thought somebody on the offensive line was hurt. Looking at the depth chart that the Cardinals have released, it is Trevor Reed, Caleb Chandler, Brian Hudson, Adonis Boone, and Renato Brown. So no, nobody's hurt, at least on the depth chart. So I apologize for that distraction. But that just goes to show you a fully healthy offensive line. The starters that started the year are the starters that are present in the second to last week of the season. So that is something to definitely smile about, because you have that continuity and you have that health on the offensive line, but that also puts an emphasis on how well this offensive line needs to play. Hasn't necessarily been the greatest pass protection team in the country this season. Maybe not necessarily have lived up to expectations, but they're still a solid, respectable unit. And it's easier said than done trying to protect for a mobile quarterback, because, you have essentially no idea what happens at times, and you're kind of just playing on the fly when it comes to, playing off of the run pass option. And obviously Louisville runs that a lot. But the Cardinals are about, I think, 79th in the country in or 69th in the country, one of the two, in sacks allowed per game, which I think it's a little under 2 or over 2. So Louisville needs to do a good job of protecting the quarterback, whoever that may be. Now, granted, NC State isn't necessarily the greatest pass rushing team. They have some solid players on the defensive line and in the front seven, but they're 74th in the country, right in the middle of the pack when it comes to getting after opposing quarterbacks. They're averaging just over 2 sacks per game. So it goes without saying that, although they have a solid defensive line, that hasn't really translated that much in terms of bringing down the opposing quarterback. Now, granted, there's more emphasis on protecting the quarterback for Louisville this week than maybe in weeks past. Let's say Malik Cunningham, which probably with injuries at this point, it sounds like the perception is that Brock Doman is going to be the starting quarterback. If in some instance Malik Cunningham is the starter, obviously him playing injured, that is going to be a heavy emphasis on keeping him up off of the ground, keeping him to where he is minimizing as much of the hits that he's taking. So you're going to have to provide a good, solid, clean pocket, because with him being hurt, you would assume that you're not going to see him utilize the run pass option as much. But a lot of people think that Brock Doman's going to be the starter. That's also another reason why there's going to be a lot of emphasis on protecting the quarterback and setting the tone at the line of scrimmage, because you saw what Clemson did last week. They brought the house more often than not when Doman came into the game, and it really disrupted the flow of the Cardinals offense. Clemson and Dabo Swinney basically said, hey, we're going to bring the house. We're going to allow you to put our defensive backs in one-on-one coverage, and we are going to dare you to beat us by throwing the football consistently down the field. Louisville was not able to answer that ring of the bell, and you saw what Louisville struggled with. They struggled to protect the quarterback last week of whoever it was, whether it was Malik Cunningham, whether it was Brock Doman, and a quarterback that still is inexperienced. Yes, he started the game against Virginia and got a win against one of the ACC's worst teams. Sure, he played a second half against Clemson. Yeah, he got in the game against Boston College. That's still not necessarily enough in-game action. Now, granted, he has a week where he's probably preparing as QB1, so devising a game plan for him in this offense, I get it. He's probably going to be put into a better position to succeed when you take out the majority of the run-pass option play calls. But still, I think that you have to give Brock Doman time to go through his reads, and it might take a little bit more time than it would a guy who's been starting 10 games this season. So from a protecting the quarterback standpoint, obviously there's some added emphasis on this, but also from the rushing attack. The Cardinals didn't do a great job of helping the rushing attack when it comes to the offensive line. Didn't create a lot of holes. Now, granted, you can say this, Louisville's offensive line didn't necessarily play the greatest last week. Well, to be fair, if we're going to talk about the struggles, I would be doing this position group a disservice if I didn't mention that Clemson's defensive line, led by Brian Bresee, Miles Murphy, so on and so forth. It's a very, very, very good defensive line. Tyler Davis, so on and so forth. There's a lot of standouts on this defensive line. But at the same time, it's still no excuse because you're turning around and you're playing an NC State defense that features one of the best rushing defenses in the country. They are ninth in the NCAA, averaging under 100 yards per contest on the ground to their opponents, 92.3 yards per game to be exact. You have a solid trio of linebackers, Drake Thomas, Peyton Wilson, and Isaiah Moore. You also have Davin Van, who is the defensive tackle with 25 tackles on the season, 3.5 sacks. You also have some guys like Corey Durden, linebacker Jalen Scott, and then defensive ends Savion Jackson. And there's a handful of other players that really make a difference when it comes to this defensive front seven. So NC State, a solid rushing defense. Louisville's rushing attack obviously has the dynamic potential to be one of the country's best rushing attacks in any given week. You have a handful of very solid running backs. Tyon Evans and Jawar Jordan have been the go-to players in the committee over the past couple weeks, with Travion Cooley being out due to personal reasons. Jalen Mitchell still battling injury. So I don't know if there's any inactives for the game on Saturday. I'm not sure what the status of Travion Cooley and Jalen Mitchell are. I don't think that Tyon Evans is out either. But, when Tyon Evans runs for over 100 yards, you see what Louisville's able to do. You saw what they're able to do against James Madison, the big 50-yard touchdown run against Wake Forest that really put the game into a spot to where a lot of momentum could be gained. But yeah, Jawar Jordan has been great as well. So I think that if you open up holes for your rushing attack and set the tone going, or setting the tone early going for the rushing attack, and then also protecting the quarterback, the first two keys of the game go hand in hand. I think that if you set the tone at the line of scrimmage, it gives you that opportunity and makes it more of a possibility that the offense starts out solid. So that's going to be the focus for me offensively, is all about getting the game going offensively and setting the tone in the trenches. Defensively, look, it's more the same. It is getting into the opposing backfield, even more so against the NC State Wolfpack. We're going to talk about that here in just a second after we talk about our friends over at Nugenics. Look, as men age, bodies naturally lose free testosterone. The man hormone, as it's called, it happens to every man, and it can make it more difficult to stay in shape and be energetic and active. That's because when you were younger, winning felt easier because you were at the peak of your testosterone production, what some have called the winner's hormone or the man hormone. Wouldn't it be nice to get that winner's edge again and that old swagger back in your step? Well, look no further. Nugenics Total T contains man-boosting key ingredients like testofen. Because it boosts free testosterone that the aging process robs, you'll feel stronger, leaner, with more energy and drive, and also having more passion. The Total T is the #1 selling testosterone booster at GNC, and it can help re-energize your life. So be sure to check that out by getting a complimentary bottle of Nugenics Total T when you text the word college to 231231. Text now and get a bottle of Nugenics Thermo, their most powerful fat incinerator ever, with key ingredients to help you get back into shape fast, absolutely free. Text college to 231231. Once again, that's college to 231231. Texting enrolls you into recurring automated text messages. Consent not required to purchase. Message and data rates may apply. So moving right on along into the final segment of the show, discussing the defensive key to the game. It's the same as it is every week. It is getting into the opposing backfield and causing havoc, but even more so specifically for this NC State offense. Obviously, when starting quarterback Devin Leary went down with a season-ending injury, NC State's offense took a big hit. Now, granted, when you look at how NC State fans describe their offensive production as a whole this season, even with Devin Leary, the Wolfpack's offense was sort of uninspiring. There's a lot of griping going on about the play calling, not the greatest protection. Now, they are allowing about 2 sacks per game, which, for reference, is right around about what Louisville is averaging. They have allowed 21 sacks through 10 games this season. But it is the backup quarterback situation. In the absence of Devin Leary, they have turned to true freshman quarterback MJ Morris. Morris, the Carrollton, Georgia native, stepped into the role and played pretty solid. In his first couple of games. You look at what he was able to do against Virginia Tech, even though that's sort of a rough team to go against because Virginia Tech is one of the worst teams in the ACC. 20 of 29 for 265 yards, had 210 yards against Wake Forest. Struggled at home against Boston College, 12 of 24 for 135 yards, 1 touchdown to 1 interception. And also sustained an injury as well. So there hasn't necessarily been a clear confirmation on MJ Morris's status for this week, but many NC State fans believe that Morris possibly could be done for the rest of the regular season. Now, granted, that has not been confirmed, but it seems like the perception is that although Dave Doran hasn't come out and said anything, that it's likely that MJ Morris may not necessarily play this game. If he does, he's going to be battling through injury. So there is a possibility that graduate student Jack Chambers, a transfer from Charleston Southern, who played 4 years with the Buccaneers program, could be in line for a start against the Cardinals on the season. Hasn't necessarily gotten a ton of action, has thrown 30 passes for 57. He has completed 30 of his 57 passes for 239 yards, 1 touchdown, no interceptions, 52.6 completion percentage. So I shouldn't have to spell it out here. With the true freshman quarterback against a middle-of-the-pack offensive line, even if it's not MJ, it could be Jack Chambers, which would even create more incentive to get after the quarterback because you're going up against a player that doesn't have a ton of game action this season, a ton of Power 5 Division I football experience. So getting after the opposing quarterback That could also be, utilizing the tackle for loss situation. Now, granted, this is an NC State offense that doesn't necessarily have a premier rusher. Jordan Houston is the leading rusher, and he has under 500 yards of total rushing yards, 4.1 yards per carry. As a team, they average 3.6 yards per carry. So mainly a passing team, but overall, with the concerns over play calling, the offense hasn't necessarily been innovative, according to the the Wolfpack fan base. Also, with inexperience at quarterback, whether that be MJ Morris or Jack Chambers, look, there is going to be a opportunity here for Louisville to establish the front seven and getting after the quarterback, getting into third and long situations, and essentially beginning a chain reaction that forces NC State's offense off the field early into drives, forcing them to punt the football more than they would like, and trying to make this a game to where Louisville's defense does what they need to do, and Louisville's offense doesn't have to put up 40 points to get the victory. So I think it works hand in hand offensively. Look, it's a matter of starting the game out early, setting the tone offensively in the trenches, and then defensively getting after the opposing quarterback. So that game, 3:30 Eastern time on Saturday. There's going to be another weekend episode about the recruiting visitors and some more updates. So be sure to check that out. I also want to take this time again to extend our thoughts out to the University of Virginia football program, to the families of those that were killed, the family and friends of those that lost their lives, also to the Cavaliers football program and the University of Virginia student body as a whole. It is my understanding that the ACC network is airing the memorial services of those whose lives were lost on ACC network. I think at 3:30 on Saturday. In my opinion, a very nice gesture from the TV network, but still, we still do want to extend our thoughts over to Virginia, to that program, to those affected by these tragic losses. With that being said, that is going to wrap up this first episode of the weekend. Everyone have a great day. Be safe this weekend. Stay warm. If you can, make it out to Senior Day at Cardinal Stadium. But with that being said, regardless, go Cards.